But first, let's talk about the ongoing uprisings taking place across the country. The incredible outpouring of courage, of commitment, and the great potential as well as potential threats moving forward. Um, Across the country, demonstrations are ongoing, and significantly in New York City, the authorities have backed down somewhat. They've ended the curfew after days of rampant and vicious NYPD abuse of protesters. However, New York City has suspended habeas corpus. We don't know the state of that. In Los Angeles, the curfew is lifted. And there again have also been numerous instances of vicious policing and crackdowns. The political ramifications are starting to play out in different ways. Bill de Blasio has indicated some small cuts for the NYPD. There's reform moves being pushed on the city and state level. And in Minneapolis, most significantly, potentially, 9 out of 12 city councilors in a veto-proof majority have voted to disband that city's police department. A concrete plan has not been developed yet, and we don't exactly know what that is leading towards. What does defund and dismantle actually mean? And now is a time to be extremely concrete about this, so it goes in a universalist, democratic, and truly just direction. We know the dangers that with regards to austerity, the absolute interest in private security interests and others into mobilizing this moment for the mercenary industry, and whether or not these cuts will turn into austerity or will they be turned into cuts of police departments and radical and deep funding of everything else. That's what we need to focus on right now. Defund the police is not just defund. It is slash and get rid of abusive, broken windows, systemically racist and classist policing, and redeploy and redistribute money other vital sectors, healthcare, education, and all other areas that are vital in states and localities. It also means breaking up different functions inside the police department. Of course, you need people that investigate and deal with real crimes, but you absolutely do not need people policing communities, terrorizing and harassing communities, or being given the assignments to doing jobs that they are not able and did not even sign up to do, like social work or education. So we need to make sure that these moves don't mean that the money just gets taken away in an austerity drive, which we already see across this country. And that will be the counter move that you might see as this agenda gets embraced by a broader set of policymakers. We already know that we're about to see harsh austerity. New York City is facing a several billion-dollar budget cut. And the private sector, which has already stepped up its efforts. We've seen as an example the cooperation between one private billionaire giving the Baltimore Police Department essentially a drone program, which we've talked about on this program, that the impulse to go towards austerity and privatization is a very real political formation right now. And we also see this in other areas of the world where there's significant problems of out of control, violent, racist, and brutal policing, including Brazil and South Africa. So the clear policy agenda needs to be that that money is not going anywhere. That money is going deployed to health, education, jobs, and other community supported infrastructure. Then there needs to be the redesigning of the departments themselves so that different tasks are split up into discrete and distinct categories. And this is going to involve treating the democracy and security of all as a fundamental right and not a privilege of any one race or class. We have seen the absolute viciousness of police departments that many people have been very aware of and have known because they've been on the receiving end of from the perspective of systemic racism for quite some time. And we've seen examples like this. The Minneapolis Police Department, let's play this clip of them cutting tires of, do we have this clip of the Minneapolis Police Department cutting? Yeah. This is some protesters and news crews and medics in Minneapolis found themselves stranded after recent protests. The tires of their cars had been slashed. Many assumed the protesters were to blame. I didn't assume the protesters were to blame, but videos reveal a different culprit, the police. Watch this. These are police officers literally puncturing the tires of this car, people serving as medics during these protests. We need to get rid of all forms of lifestyle policing, all forms of so-called broken windows policing, which has been the dynamic that has facilitated the gentrification, redesigning, and absolute brutality in modern cities that have given rise and been the handmaiden of the real estate industry and extreme inequality. We need to get rid of that entirely. And we need to make sure that the budgets that remain are redeployed effectively and redesigned creatively inside the departments themselves. When aiming to dismantle a police department, we must be vigilant that the neoliberal religion of replacing the public with the private does not lead to a rise in private policing. It would be disastrous. And if we achieve the goal of weakening the police force, we can only see a rise in policing tied to private firms used to terrorize on behalf of private interest. We need to also be extremely vigilant of the Democratic Party co-opting the movement and building on symbolic reforms that don't get to the fundamentals. Now, the Democrats have put forward a bill that, as an example, would ban chokeholds. What kind of a disgusting, obscene society we live in that wasn't already banned ages ago. And of course, we've also seen, as in the murder of Eric Garner, that bans do not stop police violence. Make it easier to sue police officers who unjustly injure or kill citizens. Lower the federal threshold for when police officers can be charged with using excessive force. Create a national police misconduct registry, end racial profiling. Limit the transfer of military equipment to police departments. These are all good things in and of themselves, but none of them amount to systemic and complete demilitarization, as well as a redesign of policing so that these distinct categories are broken up between real crime that needs to be dealt with, things that should not be crimes at all, like the drug war, or areas that are best responded to by social workers, educators, and other community initiatives. The next chapter of this movement is yet to be determined. The social base is growing. There are countervailing forces prepared to absorb and redirect popular anger towards the reaffirmation of establishment power, both in terms of neoliberalism and even in terms of some of the most dangerous tendencies in policing itself. So we need to keep pressing on, and we need to be prepared with the next phases of strategy. You guys have anything to add?
I think what you hit on is really important. I would just add that when we're talking about these movements and making sure that they don't get co-opted, this recent Democratic bill is a great example of that, in the sense that these are very important reforms and things that obviously need to be done, and they're pretty agreeable. Only the most, the complete lunatics are the ones who think that the police should have tanks in the streets, right? Most people understand that that's ridiculous. But what we can't allow to happen is to let the Democrats get away with basically putting up that kind of stuff that, is just so absurd on its face, that it shouldn't exist in the first place. Another example of this is private prisons, right? Which are obviously horrible, disgusting. We shouldn't have, for-profit prisons. But those are also represent, small portion of the prison population and the prison system, right? So we need to make sure that yes, get these reforms that are easy to do, and are agreeable to most people through. Absolutely. But don't let them basically draw all our energy towards towards things that aren't going to hit at the fundamental issue. I mean, like the fact is that, you know, it's these police officers murdering people in the streets with their bare hands, oftentimes, not using to do these horrendous acts. It doesn't take that kind of militarization to have that happen. So we just need to keep our eye on the ball, basically, and not allow people to distract us with easy victories, because we need big ones.
We need big ones. And everybody wants democracy and security. Mm-hmm. And those are core building blocks. And the point is that for so many people, predominantly, of course, in poor, lower income and Black and brown communities, the police are not a securitizing or democratic force. That is the fundamental thing that needs to happen. That's why you'll see contradictory poll results, that on one hand, there's a significant lack of trust in the police for obvious reasons, but also in other cases, a desire for the police to do more, as an example, like solving serious crimes like murder. Mm-hmm. This needs to be exactly the point of the message, and that, you know, security and democracy are not a question of privilege. They're a question of core rights for all. And that's exactly what the fight needs to be about. And that's also why it cannot be solved in a libertarian austerity direction either, because it's not a question of cuts and redeployment and, you know, leaving areas, you know, to either quote unquote fend for themselves or distributing funds for the private sector. It is about making something that should be, and has never been historically, some form of a public good, a actual public good for all.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I think that's going to be the important part of the messaging, because obviously we know the argument, right? You defund the police department to move funding into important social programs. And I think the reality is most people do want strong social programs. They want to get something for their tax money. You know, that's a very popular idea. So I think making sure that we're hitting on that as much as possible too is going to be very important, to say, you know, we want to actually provide a lot more to the community, things that have not been provided to the community for so long, because it's all been going to, you know, basically having armed people wander around your streets all the time. We don't want that anymore. We want to divert that money. Basically, you can't just say to people, we just want to take things away, right? You want to also have that positive message, right? Which I think is happening more and more. But it's like, as we're making the argument, we need to make sure that, you know, we're making a conscious effort to hit that as much as possible.
Definitely.
You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.